All aspects of the built and the natural environment that may impact on human health, so things from food safety through to drinking water.
Well, I'm going to be a little cliched here, but basically in a snapshot, which is sort of basically harks back to the original 1999 or 98 Environmental and Health Council strategy statement, it's basically managing the built and natural environment in a manner that minimises potential health impacts to the wider population.
To me, I suppose it's that really broad field of work, you know, covering the interaction of the environment and public health, human interaction, the natural environment and the built environment.
Environmental health is a fascinating and broad field, and it has many components, and they're all good and they're all interesting. So there's lots of directions you can take if you're interested in environmental health. So some of the very specific foci within environmental health can be with specific toxins or bacteria or hazards in the environment. That's a very specific contained areas of speciality. Or you can really look at the big picture and you can think about all the aspects of our built environment, our urban spaces, the air we breathe, the water we drink, how we shape our environment and how our environment shapes us. So the ecological determinants of health are a big part of environmental health. That's the sort that the part within environmental health that particularly interests me in my research.
Environmental health is one of the disciplines of public health that I trained in. It's a statutory of public health mainly, or it certainly was when I started training. So it had a really strong regulatory focus and was about safety and making sure that people were protected from environmental threats and contaminants and risks of harm. But it's been interesting that over time environmental health's become much more about a holistic type of approach to public health and some of the preventive health aspects of the environment. So, you know, improving access to green spaces and bike paths and public amenity and thinking of the environment as an asset to promote health rather than just something that can harm you if it all goes pear-shaped.
Some of the things I find interesting about environmental health are its complexity, its practicality and its relevance to everyday life. It unpicks some of the things that we take for granted and tells us why it is safe to drink the water and eat the food, and I think that's fascinating to understand. And it's also based very soundly in an ever-expanding and difficult to keep track of scientific basis. That's another real challenge for public health, is to keep in touch with the information that guides decision making and policy development.
There's, I personally find the environmental aspect of it very interesting in the intersection of public health legislation with environmental management legislation. And basically, in my role, I've had a lot of direct input into policy development, not only public health policy, but also policy that falls out of the Environmental Management and Pollution Control Act. Things like the state coastal policy, contaminated sites policies, guidelines for treated wastewater reuse are all things that basically I've been involved with and have separate public health components embedded in that policy and that legislation. So I found that very interesting.
It's the fact that it's such a broad area. No 2 days are the same. As an EHO working in local government, you know, in the morning I might have been out in inspecting a tattoo parlour. In the afternoon I may have been sampling the river where people are rowing, or a swimming pool or a spa. So, yeah, such variety.
I enjoy my environmental health work. So again, as a public health physician, one of the things that's probably more interesting to us is that we're talking about managing the health of an entire population rather than managing the health problems of an individual. And so when you're thinking about that in the environmental health context, it's much more about where the opportunities are within the environment to actually not just improve safety and reduce risk, but how you can use your public health physician skills to improve the use of the environment as an asset for people who've got chronic diseases, to improve things for them, or how the environment and environmental strategies are important for childhood obesity, mental health, so a variety of different ways in which it complements what would be a traditional clinical approach to addressing problems.
The nature of it, how dynamic it is, the need for quick decisions, the coordination of multi-faceted teams, trying to draw in different skill levels, the fact that you're always on call, there's always something going to happen outside of work hours rather than the standard 9 to 5. So yeah, look, it's pretty good from that respect, and that can pose a challenge.
The challenges. The challenges are enormous because nobody has control over the environment, my environment. I can't control the emissions from my neighbours' vehicles or my neighbours' wood heaters. I can't control the temperature. There's all sorts of things I can't control. The traffic, cycling to work, there's all sorts of things. Whether my house is insulated depends on whether I have the means to do so and the knowledge and desire to do so. So the most challenging and the most wonderful thing about environmental health is when you've got a problem, it's a complicated problem and you need to work across sectors. I work a lot with the forestry industry. I work with land managers, for example, in my bushfire work. I interact with home heating and chemical engineers in my heater work. And it's getting the perspectives, and a lot of it, because it's major changes that are required, it might be emission standards for wood heaters, for example, requires political change and political direction. So it's relating with all these other industries and with our politicians, advocacy, but scientific rigour. And I think the best way to be an advocate in environmental health is to do the really high quality science, because nobody can argue with death rates when it comes down to that. And that's how I feel I can contribute.
Challenging, I suppose, in the fact that the area is so broad. So basically, you're not a specialist, you're a generalist, but often presented with very specialist issues and problems. So it's challenging, yeah.
It's a very broad domain. It's very hard to get your head around the complexity of all the issues that you may have to deal with or may come across your desk for an opinion on any given day. So it is really important to know who's out there with the knowledge, who can be turned to the task to develop a specialised report on something. That's particularly important. You can't do it all yourself. It's a tricky area. The causes that underlie a lot of environmental health issues are very complex, and they're obvious and often multifactorial causes to a particular sort of event. It's not like Jon Snow taking the handle off the pump. You can't always just fix the problem as simply as that. And it's often also difficult to reduce the actual risk to zero. And we live in an era of intolerance of risk and a degree of heightened intolerance of risk, and also a wish to find someone to blame or to take legal or some other culpability for things that are happening. Sometimes things just happen, sometimes risk can't be eliminated, so that's a quite difficult environment to work in. Risk communication, which is an important part of environmental health practice, helps, but you can't always completely control the message that goes out or how it's interpreted or turned back to you. So those sort of issues are quite challenging.
I just think the uncertain nature of the next problem, it's that you never really know. So it's and you think you've got a handle on something, and then there'll be another variable will be thrown into the mix, and you'll think, oh, I hadn't thought of that one before. So it's a constant mental challenge. Just I think also just dealing with the breadth of work that we have to deal with. It's not a discrete area, or it's not little silos. It's quite broad and far-reaching, basically.
Look, I think outside of my area of drinking water, things like obesity, definitely. I think Tasmania's fairly poorly placed in that indicator. So I'd like to see some focus on that, particularly in the younger children.
Also, we work in an environment where the role of environmental health was often managed by the health inspector type person, but environmental health has become a really broad and detailed scientific discipline, and there's a desperate need to actually have more broadly and deeply trained environmental health practitioners out there. So We don't have enough of those people in Tasmania, for example, at the moment, on the ground, but building up a workforce in environmental health over the years to come will be important.
Absolutely no doubt about the biggest future challenge in Tasmania for environmental health, globally for environmental health, is global environmental health. Global warming, climate change, and all sorts of other environmental changes that are going with our current era. It's been named the Anthropocene, meaning it's the era where our environment has really been shaped by humans. Higher CO2, higher greenhouse gases, higher temperatures, natural disasters, more pollution, degradation of waterways, using up fossil water, our food supply, mass supply of foods, our mass transportation, all these things have come to a head right now. And the future is going to be interesting, and the challenges are only going to get bigger.
Well, I suppose resourcing is overriding. When I came into the area of environmental health, perhaps a decade or longer ago, that was the hot topic.
Climate change as being the biggest issue, I acknowledge that is a tremendously important and may well be the most important challenge we face.